The night my brother laughed at me and asked if I was still single, I didn't argue, shout, or defend myself. I simply tapped my phone under the table and whispered, "Are you close?" What happened next would freeze that room into silence and force everyone who betrayed me to confront a truth they buried for 10 years. Before I tell you how a single moment unraveled a decade of lies, do me a small favor, support this story by subscribing and telling me in the comments where you're listening from. Stories like this only survive when someone chooses to hear them. Thank you. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I hadn't returned to Ravenwood Summit in 10 years. Not since the day my life collapsed so fast I barely had time to understand what I'd lost. Yet there I was again, standing beneath the amber glow of chandeliers inside the Crestfall Lodge, while snow drifted outside the tall windows like an audience waiting for a confession. Everything about the place screamed legacy: polished wood floors, crystal glassware, walls lined with old family photographs meant to remind everyone exactly who mattered. Walking into that room felt like stepping into a version of myself I'd tried to bury. People turned when they saw me. Some whispered my name in surprise. Others offered polite smiles, the kind reserved for relatives you don't quite remember but feel obligated to acknowledge. Most just stared, as if I were a ghost who had wandered back into a story that no longer belonged to him. I moved slower than I meant to, each step dragging memories behind it. 10 years ago, I'd been young, hopeful, painfully trusting. The kind of man who believed love and loyalty were permanent things. Now I was quieter, sharper, better at hiding damage. But standing there made every scar ache again. Across the room, I spotted my brother. Lucian Hale. Tall. Perfectly groomed. Wearing that practiced smile he'd always used when he wanted admiration without effort. The same smile that had worked on our parents, our relatives, even on me, until the day he took everything I loved and left me to carry the shame. He stood beside our parents like a crowned heir. My mother straightened when she noticed me, her expression polite but guarded. My father nodded stiffly. But Lucian, he didn't bother hiding the spark in his eyes. That look. The one that said he still believed he'd won. I took my seat near the edge of the room, far enough to observe without being dragged into conversations soaked in pity. I could hear the unspoken questions floating around me. Wasn't he the one who got abandoned before the wedding? Didn't he disappear after that disaster? How sad. 10 years, and that was still my role. Then Lucian saw me properly. He raised his glass and spoke loudly enough for the entire room to hear. 10 years, Elias, he said smoothly. And still single? Laughter rippled across the tables, not cruel enough to be called mockery, not kind enough to be forgiven. My chest tightened, but my face remained still. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I slipped my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen, and murmured into it, "Are you here yet, love?" Lucian's smile flickered. At the time, no one else understood what that meant. But my life had changed long before that night. They just hadn't seen it yet. A murmur rose near the entrance. Someone whispered about a car outside. I turned my head just in time to see sleek black headlights cut through the falling snow and stop at the lodge's steps. Lucian frowned. The tinted window lowered halfway. That was all it took. The color drained from my brother's face so fast I thought he might fall. His wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor. "It's you," he whispered. The room went dead silent. And as I watched him unravel, something I'd locked away for 10 years finally cracked open, because to understand that moment, you need to know what he did to me. 10 years earlier, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. I was 28, standing on the edge of a future I believed in completely. My fiancée, Marielle Vaughn, was brilliant, elegant, and confident in a way that made people gravitate toward her without trying. She came from the Vaughn family, old money, quiet power, the kind of name people spoke carefully. And somehow, she chose me. Our wedding was planned at Silverpine Estate, nestled high in the mountains. White stone paths. Candles lining the walkways. Flowers arranged to look like fresh snowfall. I obsessed over every detail because I wanted it perfect, for her, for us. 3 days before the ceremony, everything changed. Marielle stopped answering my calls. She canceled our final fitting with a short text. When I went to her parents' home, a staff member told me she wasn't feeling well. But when our eyes met briefly that night, there was something unfamiliar there, distance, coldness, like she was already gone. I told myself it was nerves. Everyone said weddings caused panic. I clung to that explanation because the alternative was unthinkable. The next morning, she asked me to meet her. I drove to the guest house behind the Vaughn estate believing she needed reassurance. Believing I could fix whatever was wrong. Instead, I opened the door and saw my brother standing beside her. Lucian spoke first. "We're in love," he said calmly. "She's marrying me instead." I remember my body going numb. Like someone had unplugged me from myself. I looked at Marielle, waiting for her to deny it. To laugh. To tell me this was some cruel misunderstanding. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "You're safe," she whispered. "Too safe. I need someone who fits my world." Lucien smiled. Then came the lie that destroyed everything. He told me he'd shown her proof that I'd been unfaithful, messages I had never sent, conversations I never wrote, evidence he fabricated by stealing my phone and rewriting fragments of my life. And she believed him. When our parents found out, they didn't question it. They didn't ask for my side. They lined up behind Lucien as if he had always been the rightful choice. My father said Marielle suited Lucien better. My mother told me to step aside gracefully so the family wouldn't look divided. That night, I stood alone in the snow behind our childhood home, breath turning to frost, realizing the world I trusted had never been mine. And that was the night I left Ravenwood Summit. Portland swallowed me whole when I arrived with a single suitcase and no plan. I slept on office floors, worked brutal hours, and learned how to survive without relying on anyone. I watched people steal my ideas, take credit for my work, and I let them, because every betrayal taught me something. Eventually, I stopped climbing other people's ladders and built my own. Years later, when I walked into a boardroom as a consultant everyone trusted during a corporate crisis, I met Seraphine Vale, sharp, composed, devastatingly intelligent. She saw through me immediately. Not my past. My potential. She became the first person in years who truly understood me. And the day she asked if I wanted to dismantle a failing corporation tied to my family's empire, I realized fate had a sense of timing. That corporation was Hail Dominion. Lucien's kingdom. And 10 years after destroying my life, my brother had no idea who was standing across from him, or how close his carefully built world was to collapsing. The silence after the black car arrived felt heavier than any sound. Forks hovered midair. Conversations died where they stood. Even the fireplace crackling at the far end of the lodge seemed to quiet, as if the room itself sensed something irreversible unfolding. Lucien hadn't moved. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle twitch beneath his skin. For a decade, I'd imagined what it might look like to see him afraid. I'd expected satisfaction. Vindication. Instead, what I felt was colder and steadier, a strange calm, like watching a storm finally reach shore after years at sea. The door attendant opened the entrance fully, and she stepped inside. Seraphine Vale didn't rush. She never did. Snow clung lightly to the hem of her dark coat, melting into the polished wood floor as she crossed the threshold. Every step echoed. People knew her name even if they didn't know her face. Power recognizes power instinctively. Lucien found his voice at last, though it came out strained. "What is this?" he demanded, trying to sound amused. "Some kind of stunt?" Seraphine's gaze passed over him without pause, then settled on me. The way her eyes softened for half a second changed the entire atmosphere. This wasn't business theater. This was real. "Sorry I'm late," she said calmly. "Traffic was worse than expected." She reached my side, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her despite the cold outside. I didn't introduce her yet. I wanted them to sit with the uncertainty a little longer. My mother stood halfway from her chair. "Excuse me," she said, forcing a polite smile. "May we ask who you are?" Seraphine turned to her, expression unreadable. "Of course." Lucien cut in sharply. "We're in the middle of a family event. And I'm here on company business," Seraphine replied evenly. "The timing is unfortunate, but unavoidable." That word, unavoidable, landed like a warning. People shifted. Whispers began threading through the room again, but now they were nervous, confused. My father's face had gone pale. He recognized the tone. He'd used it himself when deals went bad. I finally spoke. "Everyone," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, "this is Seraphine Vale." A few gasps rippled through the room. Founder. CEO. The woman whose name had been in every financial paper for the past 5 years. The one rumored to buy dying companies and strip them down to their bones before rebuilding them stronger, or letting them collapse entirely. Lucien's confidence cracked. "That's not funny," he snapped. "You think you can scare me with?" "I'm his wife," Seraphine said simply. The word hit the room like a dropped plate. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Lucien took an involuntary step back. "That's impossible," he whispered. You disappeared." "I rebuilt," I replied quietly. "You just weren't invited to watch." The room erupted into overlapping voices. Questions. Shock. Denial. Lucien tried to laugh it off, but it sounded brittle, hollow. "This is absurd," he said. "You expect us to believe this is real?" Seraphine slipped her arm through mine, not possessively, but with certainty. "You don't need to believe it," she said. "You'll see it documented shortly." She gestured subtly toward the entrance again. Two men and a woman stepped inside, carrying slim briefcases. Lawyers. The kind who don't bluff. My father's voice trembled. What is going on? Seraphine finally turned fully toward him. As of this afternoon, Vale Holdings has finalized the acquisition of Hale Dominion. The room froze. No, my father barked. That's not possible. We weren't informed of. You were, one of the attorneys said calmly, opening his case. Multiple times. Notices were issued. Meetings requested. Compliance deadlines missed. Lucien lunged forward. This is sabotage. I looked at him then. Really looked. The man who had once stolen my life was unraveling in front of 50 witnesses, his control slipping with every word. You sabotaged yourself, I said. The attorney continued, voice clinical. The acquisition was accelerated following the discovery of financial irregularities. A murmur spread. People turned toward Lucien instinctively. What irregularities? My mother demanded. I answered before anyone else could. Diverted funds, I said. Hidden liabilities. Shell accounts. And money traced directly to Lucien. Lucien's face drained of color. You're lying, he said hoarsely. Seraphine nodded to the attorney, who placed several documents on the table. Bank records. Transfer logs. Dates circled in red. My father staggered back into his chair. Lucien shook his head wildly. This is a setup. You planned this. I met his gaze. I found the truth, I said. That's all. A woman near the back, one of our distant relatives, stood up trembling. I heard rumors, she said. About debts. About investors pulling out. Another voice followed. Then another. Pieces of a story people had avoided for years finally began fitting together. Lucien turned toward my parents desperately. Say something, he pleaded. You know me. My father looked at him with something like grief. I didn't know you, he said quietly. That broke him. Lucien slammed his hand on the table. He did this, he shouted, pointing at me. He's been waiting for this. 10 years. Seraphine stepped forward, her presence cutting through his accusation like glass. He recused himself from the final decision, she said calmly. This audit was conducted independently. Lucien stared at her. Then why are you here? She met his gaze without flinching. Because the truth always arrives eventually, she said. And tonight was unavoidable. A former employee rose hesitantly. Evelyn left, she said softly. She found out her name was being used for loans she never approved. My stomach tightened, but only briefly. The pain was distant now. Familiar, but no longer controlling. Lucien's shoulders sagged. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he whispered. I stepped closer. You meant to take everything, I said. You just didn't expect consequences. Silence swallowed the room. For 10 years, I'd imagined screaming at him. Demanding apologies. Watching him beg. Instead, I felt nothing but release. The truth had finally spoken for itself. And everyone was listening. The room didn't explode the way I once imagined it might. There were no screams, no dramatic exits, no fists slammed hard enough to break tables. Instead, something quieter and far more destructive took hold. Truth settled. It crept through the lodge like cold air through cracks in old stone, impossible to stop, impossible to ignore. Lucien stood there breathing hard, eyes darting from face to face as if searching for someone, anyone, to rescue him. But no one moved. Not our parents. Not the relatives who once praised him endlessly. Not the business associates who had laughed at his jokes minutes earlier. They were all recalculating now, silently measuring how close they had stood to the edge without realizing it. My father finally spoke, his voice stripped of authority for the first time I could remember. How long, he asked Lucien. How long has this been happening? Lucien swallowed. It started as temporary, he said. Just shifting money to stabilize things. I was going to fix it. Temporary doesn't leave trails like this, one of the attorneys replied calmly, tapping another document. These transfers span years. Years. The word echoed inside my chest. Years of deception layered on top of the first betrayal, growing larger, heavier, until the structure couldn't support itself anymore. My mother shook her head slowly, as if the motion alone might erase what she was seeing. Why didn't you tell us? She whispered. Lucien let out a hollow laugh. Because you never questioned me, he said bitterly. Not once. You just assumed I knew what I was doing. The admission landed harder than any accusation. I saw it hit them, my parents realizing their silence hadn't been neutrality. It had been permission. One of my uncles stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This puts all of us at risk, he said. Our investments, our reputations. Seraphine cut him off without raising her voice. Those concerns are being addressed. Individually. That single word fractured the illusion of unity they had hidden behind for decades. Individually meant there would be no shared shield this time. No collective protection. Everyone would answer for their own involvement, or lack of it. Lucien turned toward me then, eyes glassy, voice cracking. You could have warned me. I met his gaze steadily. You had 10 years, I said. I warned you back then. You just didn't listen. The room fell silent again, this time heavier, more final. Someone asked quietly, is there anything that can be done? The attorney responded. There will be a transition period. Cooperation will be noted. Lucien laughed weakly. Cooperation, he repeated. That's what this is now. I stepped forward then, not out of anger, but because something needed to be said before the moment passed. I didn't come back to destroy this family, I said. I came back because I was asked to do a job. The truth surfaced because it existed, not because I forced it. My father looked at me, really looked, and I saw something shift in his expression. Regret, maybe. Or realization. You could have told us who you'd become, he said quietly. I tried, I replied. You stopped listening a long time ago. Lucien sank into his chair, the arrogance finally gone, replaced by something smaller and far more human, fear. I never meant to hurt you, he muttered. The words arrived a decade too late. Seraphine placed a hand on my arm, grounding me in the present. We should leave, she said softly. No one stopped us. As we walked toward the exit, conversations resumed behind us, hushed and frantic. Damage control. Strategy. Blame redistribution. The machinery of a collapsing empire grinding loudly now that it could no longer pretend to run smoothly. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the steps in white. The black car waited, engine idling, patient. As the door closed behind us, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just relief. Because the weight I'd carried for 10 years, the shame, the doubt, the questions that haunted quiet nights, had finally been set down. In the car, Seraphine didn't speak right away. She never filled silence unnecessarily. She waited until we were moving, until the lodge lights faded into the distance. You okay? She asked. I exhaled slowly. I am now. She nodded, accepting the answer without probing. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, legal briefings, and controlled chaos. News of the acquisition leaked, followed quickly by whispers of internal misconduct. Articles were carefully worded. Names avoided. But within certain circles, the truth spread fast. Lucien resigned before he could be removed. My parents called once. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I finally understood something I'd never allowed myself to see. Closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from clarity. I didn't need them to validate my experience anymore. The truth had done that on its own. Weeks later, I stood in my office overlooking the city I'd rebuilt myself in, watching rain streak down the glass. A decade ago, I'd arrived here with nothing but bitterness and survival instincts. Now I stood here with purpose, partnership, and a future that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Seraphine joined me, handing me a mug of coffee. They'll keep trying, she said matter-of-factly. I know, I replied. What will you do? I considered the question carefully. I'll keep my boundaries, I said. That's enough. She smiled then, not proudly, not smugly, but warmly. It is. That night, lying awake beside her, I thought back to the man I'd been 10 years ago. The one who believed silence was strength. That endurance equaled dignity. That letting things go meant healing. I understood now how wrong I'd been. Healing wasn't forgetting. Strength wasn't shrinking. And dignity wasn't silence. It was choosing yourself when no one else would. And tomorrow, when the final pieces fell into place, I would finally walk forward without carrying the weight of a past that never deserved to define me. The morning after the reunion, I woke up without the familiar weight in my chest. For years, every significant moment in my life had carried the echo of what Lucien did to me, every success muted, every failure amplified by the idea that I was the brother who lost everything. That morning, for the first time, the echo was gone. The world hadn't changed overnight. The city outside our window moved at its usual pace. Cars honked. People hurried to work. Coffee brewed somewhere down the street. But something inside me had shifted permanently, like a bone finally set after healing crooked for too long. The fallout was immediate, though quieter than anyone expected. Hale Dominion's board released a carefully worded statement about strategic restructuring and leadership realignment. Lucien's resignation was framed as voluntary. The family tried to preserve dignity the only way they knew how, by pretending they had always been in control. But control has a way of dissolving once the truth is exposed. Private messages started reaching me through distant relatives. Some apologetic. Some defensive. Some asking, with thinly veiled panic, whether they were personally affected by the acquisition. I answered none of them. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because I finally understood that I didn't owe explanations to people who had never asked for my truth when it mattered. My parents called again a week later. This time, I answered. My mother's voice trembled. We didn't know how bad it was, she said, as if that absolved 10 years of silence. You knew enough, I replied calmly. You just didn't want to see it. My father spoke next. His tone was quieter than I remembered, stripped of command. You've changed. Yes, I said. I had to. They asked if we could meet. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes either. I told them we could talk again when they were ready to listen without defending themselves. That boundary stunned them more than anger ever could. Lucien never called. I heard about him through fragments, lawyers, former colleagues, rumors passed between people who suddenly remembered I existed. He was cooperating. He was struggling. He was angry. He was blaming everyone except himself. And for the first time in my life, none of it was my problem. Weeks later, Seraphine and I stood in a conference room finalizing the last phase of the transition. Hail Dominion was no longer a family monument. It was a case study. A lesson in what happens when entitlement goes unchecked and loyalty is confused with silence. As we signed the final documents, Seraphine glanced at me. Any regrets? I thought about it honestly. I regretted the years I spent believing I was disposable. I regretted the nights I blamed myself for being betrayed. I regretted how long it took me to realize my worth didn't depend on my family's approval. But about this? About how it ended? No, I said. This was necessary. That evening, we walked through the city together, hand in hand, unnoticed and unremarkable in the best possible way. No spotlights. No whispers. Just two people moving forward without looking back. I realized then that what Lucien stole from me all those years ago wasn't just a woman or a wedding. He stole my confidence. My voice. My belief that I deserved a place without having to fight for it. Taking that back didn't require shouting. It required clarity. Months passed. Life settled into a rhythm built on honesty instead of performance. I focused on my work, on building something meaningful, on surrounding myself with people who didn't see kindness as weakness. One afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. It was Lucien. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening it. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a defense. It was a single sentence. I see it now. I didn't reply. Because understanding doesn't erase damage. And closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes, it comes from knowing you survived something that was designed to break you, and walked away stronger without becoming bitter. The last time I thought about that reunion, it wasn't with anger. It was with distance. Like remembering a storm after the sky has cleared. You don't relive the fear. You remember the fact that you're still standing. I didn't win that night. I reclaimed myself. And if you're listening to this and carrying a betrayal that changed the course of your life, I want you to know something. Healing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself without asking permission. And before you go, if this story resonated with you, do me a small favor. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Stories like this matter more when they're heard, and your presence here means more than you know. Thank you for listening.